CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Des Moines, Iowa. So, Caitlin, you've been on the ground. You've been speaking with people in Iowa. What are really their biggest concerns when they talk about voting in the first caucus state?
Right. Well, Democrats we've been talking to, their number one priority is defeating Donald Trump. So they're meeting all of these candidates, sometimes for the first time, trying to assess who is best equipped to do that. But when it relates to issues, hear over and over again that health care is a top concern. We've seen that in our polling, and that's similar to what we've been hearing in other battleground states as well. There are some local issues to pay attention to here and what voters are going to be listening for as they hear these candidates. Trade policy, especially the president's moves on trade. Climate change is a huge issue here, particularly for farmers affected directly by it, as well as the local economy and access to broadband internet, access to health care. These are all issues that the candidates are talking about here, but trying to localize some of them, specifically tailoring them to Iowa voters.
We know Washington Governor Jay Inslee has been very vocal about his plan to combat climate change. It's an issue that's familiar, particularly to the farmers of Iowa. Earlier, he had this to say.
Donald Trump's weakest point is the environment. This is where we should attack him. And we should attack him with the strongest candidate on the climate change crisis and figure out who that is. I've got a nominee. It's hard when you're standing knee deep in water, as people were. In Hamburg, Iowa is a beautiful little community. It was founded, I believe, in 1858 in Iowa. It had never been flooded before since 1858, and now is under 8 feet of water. Maybe 20 or 30% of the people will never be able to return to their homes. You can't argue this when reality intrudes.
So is this resonating, this issue of climate change, with voters there on the ground?
Well, it's interesting to hear how voters perceive this conversation, especially when you're talking to those directly affected by it, farmers, for example. And sometimes this is an issue where your political affiliation might dictate how you feel about this issue. So those Democratic voters that we've talked to say that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. Candidates need to be talking about it. Inslee mentioned the floods earlier this summer when I was in Iowa. I talked to a lot of people directly affected by that as well. Those supporting the president haven't really talked much about climate change, instead talking about policy that affects their day-to-day life. So a little bit of a divide on there, but Inslee was trying to make the point that this is an issue that should be bipartisan, it should be nonpartisan in his telling, and that while we're here in Iowa, we're trying to figure out how Democrats are going to try to win back some of those Trump supporters. They're trying to target or talk to farmers, those directly affected by the president's trade policies, and also feel that climate change is a way that they can talk to voters. And Inslee said that Republicans have to get on board with acknowledging this as an issue here.
And what do people believe is really a bigger threat to the farming industry there in Iowa? Is it climate change, or is it the president's ongoing trade war?
The issue of this trade war is so fascinating to talk to voters here about, because you kind of see differing reactions to it. Those Democrats that we talked to and Democratic candidates say that the president's trade policies are having a negative impact here in Iowa, and they're trying to really talk to those people who are affected by it. The question is, what would they do differently? And we've seen some candidates roll out rural plans to address this issue. When you talk to those supporting the president, voters here, and there are a lot of them, they point to inaction in Congress to support the president's trade policies and to support that revised NAFTA deal that he is trying to pressure Congress to act on. So you see differing reactions to it, and a lot of times it comes down to kind of where you believe politically is the best route.
Speaking of politically, there have been some Democratic candidates who've been really outspoken, calling President Trump a white supremacist or a white nationalist. Others have kind of shied away from this. Kamala Harris had this to say.
I will not participate in a conversation that simplifies this issue without recognizing, one, the history, speaking truth about it, and recognizing that it happened before this guy was in the White House. It will continue after this guy in the White House. He is certainly fanning the flames of hate. There's no question about that. But if we're going to have this conversation, let's have it in a meaningful way. Because, you know, when we have seen everything from what happened in Poway to the Tree of Life Synagogue to Charlottesville to what happened in El Paso, we should all be having a conversation that is and partly looking in the mirror to say, where have we been on this and what are we prepared to do?
Caitlin, did she have sort of concrete ideas about how to tackle this issue?
Right, well, that was in response to a question I asked her. And the reason that we asked is because some candidates are going as far to call the president a white supremacist. Elizabeth Warren is one example of it. Others have been reluctant to go that far. Joe Biden didn't call the president a white supremacist, but instead said it's a distinction without a difference. He said that the president is still encouraging these groups through his rhetoric and actions. Kamala Harris was trying to say, look, we need to have a larger conversation about this, and simplifying it into a specific term negates the whole purpose. And so she was suggesting, I asked her if there's any kind of legislation that could address the issue of white supremacy in the U.S. We've seen other candidates introduce policy as they roll out their gun proposals as well. And she said that this president is not doing enough to address this, that she would use the bully pulpit to address this issue and to kind of bring some morality to this. And she also said that the president isn't doing enough to combat this kind of terrorism. So that's one way that she'll do this. Now, Kamala Harris was one of the first to introduce a gun policy proposal earlier this year, earlier in this cycle, and this is something that these candidates are talking more and more about.
Speaking of gun control, you know, in the wake of last week's shootings in El Paso and in Dayton, gun control has been a big issue in the forefront here in our country as well. There's been an all-day forum on gun safety there. How are candidates tackling that topic?
Well, it is interesting that this gun forum is taking place that was arranged after these shootings. And it kind of speaks to, you know, this is an issue that Democrats do want to put at the forefront, and especially notable that they're having it here in Iowa, which voted for the president overwhelmingly in 2016. I've covered campaigns in the past, and this is the first primary where we've really seen these candidates tackle this issue head on and early on. And most of them have been calling for an assault weapons ban. Most of them have been calling for the Senate to take up the universal background checks that passed in the House, and they're calling on Mitch McConnell and the president to take action. Kamala Harris, though, is going steps further. She said that she would institute an executive order if Congress didn't act in the first 100 days of her presidency on the issue of guns.
It was interesting to hear her say that and to put that out so starkly. Okay, Caitlin, we can't let you go without asking about the food over there at the Iowa State Fair. It's been an ongoing week-long look. And I want to know, please tell me, that bacon on the stick thing you showed me earlier in the week is not your personal favorite?
Don't worry, Rena. I know that you didn't love our bacon-wrapped rib on a stick. So today I have a little bit of a healthier option for you. This is a apple egg roll. So it has some fruit in it, technically. Apples wrapped in an egg roll. I've tried to find you the healthiest thing possible, and this is as close as we're coming at this point. So we're indulging in these. I will say that our team did search for salads last night and some kind of vegetable. We did find avocados. They're fried, however.
Fried avocados.
We're going to come back a little heavier. Hope you don't mind.
I certainly don't mind. I have been enjoying learning about the food there at the Iowa State Fair. Please do bring me back a funnel cake, though. I'm going to count on that for next week.
We will.
Caitlin,
we've got it for you.
Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, thanks so much.
Thank you.